Welcome back to Rangers Roundup number 3. Your New York Rangers beat reporters Lou Orlando, Jack Warner. As promised, we've put together a little thing for the trade deadline, a little post-trade deadline review of the Rangers trade for Alex Wennberg, Jack Roslovic, Chad Ruhwedel. And so we figured, hey, let's get another special guest on. We brought on Matt Mugno, who...
I was excited for this one,
This is a good one. It's someone that we've known on the bridge for a little bit now, someone that has worked the beat, hosts a hockey podcast, Puck Talk CS. Really cool guy, and so we really get to break down a ton of the deadline stuff, to some of the stuff that's been happening all along this month. And this deadline, I think, was something that people were looking forward to for a while, so it was really cool now that's over to sit down, look through it, and just review everything.
Well, and especially as passionate as Matthew is about the Rangers and all things hockey, it was fun to talk to him about it specifically, especially with our, connections to him that will actually get touched on in the interview. But no, it was an exciting deadline. It was one that obviously there were a lot of different rumors. Things could go a lot of different ways. There was the possibility of Capo Caco on the chopping block, which didn't happen. He's still a New York Ranger, which I'm happy. Exactly, but I'm happy about that. But no, nevertheless, we got into a lot of good conversation. I think it was an interesting, it was an interesting deadline for the Rangers that, it was because there was an interesting objective. It's been a banged up roster throughout the year, and there were clear holes that needed to be filled based on the moves that they make at this deadline. And, I think I've heard various opinions on it, but the general consensus has been pretty good. So it was fun to hop into things with him, especially, like I said, he's our boy.
Well, we get into a ton of stuff with Matt. It's a really cool interview. Goes a little longer than I think we thought we were going to, but it's all good stuff. So I think without further ado, let's send you right to that. Matt Mugno.
We are joined now by not just a good hockey mind, but a good friend, Matthew Mugno, host of Puck Talk CS, former New York Rangers beat reporter for the Hockey News. That's where we met him on the Chase Bridge. Matt, appreciate you for joining us, taking some time. How's everything, brother?
I love it. Plug in the Chase Bridge, not just the bridge.
Have to do it.
It's great to be on with you guys. Miss you guys up in the booth and in the box up there. And I mean, a lot to talk about. You have Rempe-mania, trade deadline. I'm ready to get right into it.
This is so full circle too, just because I still remember all the way back into the preseason, I had just been appointed to the position with Rangers, and I was so excited to get at it that I was even asking to go cover preseason games just to kind of get a feel and just get to the Garden and take it all in. And I still remember coming home from because you meet a lot of different journalists, you meet a lot of different people when you're doing what we're doing, but and it's a high and by, you'll have some conversations. But I came home to Lou that night, back to the apartment. I was just like, Lou, I met this kid there tonight. He went to Quinnipiac. I talked to him the whole time. He was so cool. It was really cool the first time I came home. I was like, I made a friend at work today.
No, man. And you know what? It's that's what it's all about. People business,
I think the first video I ever watched of you was I went on your Twitter and I saw that pinned your call of the Quinnipiac chip.
So cool.
That's where it first started.
Yeah, that was I was really fortunate for that. Obviously, like we talked about before on air, you guys are in a great spot, and that kind of put things into motion. So, yeah, hockey was always where it was at, and I was fortunate that I was able to not only be there but broadcast for the national championship. I'd reported on that team all year, so at that point, Quinnipiac was the Gonzaga of NCAA men's ice hockey. So it was crazy to see it, to be there for a 4-year period of time at a school where they're going to win. The chances are just that the percentages of doing that are so low. So that was probably the most fortunate thing I've ever done.
Well, we brought you in at a pretty good time to talk some puck, especially for the Rangers. They go out at the deadline. They trade for Jack Roslovic, trade for Alex Wennberg, Chad Ruhwedel as well. I think let's start right there with the deadline. I think you have a lot of mixed thoughts on how the Rangers did. A lot of teams make big moves. Rangers, I think, stay on the quieter side. So where are we grading this deadline? How are you feeling about what they've done to take that extra step?
This was a deadline of keeping your assets. It seemed like Pittsburgh really wanted, I retract that. I should start with the fact that the Rangers were the only other team that could really take a shot over Carolina to acquire Jake Ensel. They needed a first-line right winger. That was bar none, no doubt. 3C, first-line right winger. You lost Filipino. You also have a weird makeup. You have guys that are we were talking about before, 2020 draft class, 4 players on the roster, 21 years old, Capo Caco. Adam Fox and Lindgren are 25 on the younger side. Then you have your Trouba, Trocheck, Kreider, Zibanejad. They're all 30 plus. They're in win now. Artemi Panarin's two more years on that in mega contract. And when they brought him in, one of the best free agent signings of all time. With that, they needed that one right wing to kind of move the needle. And I think the moves actually will benefit them. They were not looking to give up Capo Caco plus Brett Berard, Brennan Othmann, Gabriel Perreault. And it seemed that Pittsburgh wanted not only one, but two of those players along with the pick. And you saw that's what ended up happening in the package that Carolina sent. Carolina has one of the best prospect pools. They had the ability to reach in there, send some picks. And I think on Dubas' end, he went for quantity over quality of what was coming through. But I think for Dubas and the dealings, this is pure speculation, but I think his dealings were, he looked and said, we want some quantity, but the Rangers have some legit quality. Now, granted, Capo Caco at 22, I believe 22, 23, he's a player that's doing really well on that third line. You remove the second overall pick label to his name, and you look at him as a great third line play facilitator. But at the end of the day, the experiments on the first line right wing weren't working. You couldn't really move him because with Blake Wheeler down now, he wasn't performing to the level they had initially thought, or at least he wasn't excelling over the league minimum contract he signed at 37 years old. Now you're looking and saying, well, we don't have the right wing depth. Lafreniere shifted from left wing to right wing. He's doing fine on that line, but he's not even a natural right winger. So Frank Vatrano came into the conversation with Henrique. I think it was the same deal. Pat Verbeek knew he had the leverage in those dealings. And overall, yeah, you pass up on a 29-goal scorer. You pass up on Jake Gensel, who to me is kind of like a 1B JT Miller. But at the end of the day, you bring in players that were on the cheaper side. You didn't really give up anything. And it's going to only benefit the team because the thesis statement at the start of the year was, this is the team that's going to get it done. These core players. They didn't add to that core. They didn't inherit a large contract, and they didn't give up their future. So I think overall, in terms of the approach, I appreciated it. And I think it harkens to 2022 when they brought in Andrew Kopp, Frank Vatrano, who at the time was only traded. They traded a fourth rounder to Florida for a player that was a third, fourth line player. He blossomed on the first line in New York. Andrew Kopp was the same way. They gave up Morgan Barron and 2 seconds, one became a first, but they went to the conference finals, and that was a player that really exceeded, again, what his expectation was. So I think it's the same dealings we're going to see with the three players they acquired. With Trouba out 2 to 3 weeks, I think the Ruhwedel deal is actually going to benefit the Rangers the most in the short term. And I think Roslovic, Wennberg are going to help them in the postseason. Probably better than I think any other player they really could have brought in respects to what they would have had to give up.
I mean, I kind of sit back and the one thing I look at with this deadline is I saw where all the prices started to fall, and I kind of went in going, the market seems really high, and then you see what Duclair goes for, which is just a third, and they even got a seventh back, or even the Vegas deal for Mantha second and a fourth. I know the Rangers didn't have a second to deal. The one thing I kind of go, because I think Roslovic's a nice fit. I watched him on Saturday, and he's got some speed, man. Like Wennberg, I like too. The one thing I kind of go is maybe you could have gotten a bit more of a playmaker to really cement a number one right wing. And when I look at what guys like Duclair and Mantha go for, that's when I kind of sit back and I go, maybe the Rangers could have pulled a move like that off. Not necessarily Gensel, but maybe that B tier level of guy.
Yeah, I think overall, obviously these dealings, this is something that's going on a majority of the season and intensifies around this time of the year. I think I would say the club overall looked and assessed what happened last year, saw how much they gave up to push, and they may have been reluctant. And we'll see how that transpires, because I think without winning, there's always going to be the Monday morning quarterback of, how everything ended up. And I do think they could have sacrificed to acquire Jake Gensel. Now, moving on from that, and like you said, Lou, I thought it was interesting because in the market, you were seeing Duclair, Tarasenko, a little bit of different situations. I think the Rangers were, I don't know how in they were on Duclair. Tarasenko chose Florida, and I don't think Washington was going to deal Mantha to New York, a division rival. And Pittsburgh, obviously, if they were going to trade Gensel, they were going to price gauge that too. So I think overall, there were a lot of names flying off the shelf. What I like the most about the move is that Roslovic was not a name on the radar. So I thought that will benefit the Rangers because it's not a name that coming into this trade deadline, everyone was expecting the move. And I do think his skill set, he has a large toolbox. He's a player that when it all comes together is the real deal. And I think he can be a solid complementary piece on that first line. That's all that first line needs is a complementary piece. So yeah, I mean, you hate to see when Tomas Hertl goes to Vegas, but Vegas has become a destination in that respect. So, I think the Rangers didn't also want to deal with some of the injury things that were going on. Like they need players that are going to be effective. So yeah, I agree. The market value, there were a lot of players out there that were going for the cheap in some respects. And I thought they still were able to get players on the cheap that are going to be impactful, but quietly impactful.
I also find it really interesting, I think, how different the perception of the Rangers deadline ended up being, making that Roslovic trade at the very end, because it was sort of like right at the buzzer. It was only a few hours before the deadline finally came to a close. And I think when you look at all of the other moves they had made up until that point, they add Wennberg. That's a solid bottom sixth, addition for, bottom six forward addition for them to make. You add Ruhwedel, that's more of a 7D guy. Like you said, it's perfect timing that Trouba is out right now and may make that move a little more valuable. He gets out there and gets some reps. But I think what's fun is up until they made the move for Roslovic, every single move they made, you still felt like it was just depth piece. It was like, okay, they brought this guy in. He may not be a bona fide stud, or he may not be one of these heavy hitters that was available at the deadline, but at least it was depth piece. I think getting Roslovic right there at the very end, just before the deadline expires, he's somebody who's gotten plenty top line minutes in Columbus. He's also had experience as a right winger, as a center. That's somebody who can be shifted around a little bit, which is something the Rangers have been prone to do this season, whether it's for injury purposes, whether it's to get just people other looks on other lines. I think that getting Roslovic right there at the end, I think kind of changed the perception of how the Rangers did at this deadline, because I think it was the final piece that they, acquired. But I think it was the first piece that you could say he's not a superstar, but I think he's too good, or he was too valuable to just also be thrown into just that depth piece category.
Yeah, I think the perception at first was that it was kind of a last-ditch effort with the timing, which I see that. It's 3:00 and the news comes in. You say, well, is this just a move to make up for the fact that they lost out? Or is this a move that they were really willing to do? And I actually think, really, based on how last season had gone, this was a really good approach. Again, when Patrick Kane was rumored to be talking with New York last February, there was a point where they lost Lindgren and lost another defender, and they played with 4 defensemen for an entire game because the cap restricted the team from calling up a defender from Hartford. Those are things that in the long run hurt the play of Adam Fox. You saw by the end of last postseason, or the playoff series against New Jersey, Fox was not the same player. He was tired, and they already had trouble with speed. They made sacrifices, but pushed maybe too far to acquire Patrick Kane. And I think the Rangers were a little more cautious this season to push that far for those players. Now, Jack, building off what you said, I think what will help the team the most, and the conversation in New York is about Mika Zibanejad. I think a lot is going to help having a solid roster. Wennberg as a checking line center with Kako and Cooley, and Roslovic on that first line, not to get those guys going, but to just be another consistent piece with them, right? It's going to be Mika and Kreider's responsibility to play as good as we've seen them play. But to have another piece, it's just going to help them move along a little more than they have all season.
Well, and I think it feels like the entire year, Rangers Twitter has been talking about who can the Rangers find that's going to spark Mika's play, and who are they going to find that's going to allow him to be that playmaking forward that we know him to be.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe Roslovic's speed is that spark, but to me, it feels more like Rangers are going to buy in that Mika is going to go back to what Mika usually is and what he was on that 2022 run that got them all the way to the conference finals. I think that's the biggest difference from this year to last year. You can compare the deadlines, and I think it's a vastly different approach for sure, and probably better fits in 2022. But to me, the biggest difference was the way Mika played. And that's obviously, I think, been a big focus and concern this season, despite the Rangers being first in the Metro, that I think the Rangers went all in and said, hey, we believe that Mika Zibanejad's going to turn the season around. And I honestly can't fault them, because the Rangers, I think, are going to live or die by what Mika Zibanejad does in the playoffs.
Yeah, he's a 16-game player. He displayed that in 2022. We did not see that in 2023, and you saw that when he's not driving play, it affects the team. You look at the players that underperformed, it was Patrick Kane, Mika Zibanejad, and Artemi Panarin. Panarin's now at that point where he looks as though he'll perform well. Lafreniere, a player that looks like he'll perform well. Chris Kreider had, I think, 6 goals in 7 games. He was unbeatable. I think he had a goal in almost every game until game 7. So those players, there's players that performed and did not. And I like that take, Lou. Like, Igor Shesterkin and Mika Zibanejad might be the keys. I always say that Mika Zibanejad's the most unique player in the NHL. Scoring center, that when he is at his best, he somehow transcends the fact that the Rangers have a Norris winning defender, Vezina winning goaltender. They have their 3rd all-time leading scorer on the team currently, and they have one of the best free agent signings of all time in Artemi Panarin. Somehow, when he's at his best, he rises above all of that. But if he's cold, it only hurts the team, because he is the team's relied, not only 3-zone 1 center, but he's also a scorer. And it really makes him one of the most unique players, I think, in the NHL.
I'm curious to I've been, especially down the stretch, campaigning that the Rangers should keep Kakko. Especially after Wheeler got hurt. It didn't make sense to me to take an asset, a guy that was playing well and I think shapes up well for the playoffs, to detract to add. That seems a little bit backwards thinking. At the same time, it was tempting, especially when you got into the Gensel conversation of, like, if I have a chance to get Jake Gensel, that's something I might have to consider. Where were you this entire time on Kakko? Because I know, even talking to Laz and Vince the other day, like, they were down for first in Kakko to get Vetrano and Henrique. Like, where were you on the scale of trading Kakko and holding on to him, all that stuff?
Yeah, I've been a supporter all year, and I remain. I see why, if you traded Kakko and a first and you acquire Gensel, and again, this is all, like, sometimes it's a result business. You go to the Stanley Cup final. That's one thing. But you lose in the second round, or you face a buzzsaw in Florida, and you say, well, now we can't sign Gensel. So you just traded for another rental that we can't even bring back. You see what Patrick Kane's doing right now in Detroit. You see what Tarasenko's doing in Florida. And I think it would only hurt. Now, the reason why it hurts is because Colin Stevenson, I talked to him yesterday. He mentioned that the Rangers have players that could come up and quickly fill in Kakko's role. Brett Berard, Gabe Perreault, probably in a year or two. Brennan Hoffman. I don't think they play the same as Kakko. I think Kakko, you erase the number 2 overall pick. Okay, he hasn't lived up to that. Okay, he's not the scorer we thought. Okay, you keep throwing that. I tie that bag up and throw it in the trash. You look at right now, He's on a checking line, and that's where he's played his best. He's a possession monster. He can move the puck. I think that removing him from that line, yes, you could call up other guys. Why not take the chance? And Chris Drury directly addressed that. When he had his phone conference the other day with the media, he stated the club and organization's confidence in Kakko. I think that's the most important part. I want to hear your guys' take on that because I saw the way you reacted. It seems as though you were in Kakko's corner too with keeping it.
I mean, I think I've been a Capo Kakko defender, and especially like we get a couple of the guys at FUV, the hockey guys, I think they like to razz us every once in a while for Kakko, and I think they've a couple of times tried to say that I overvalue his impact on the defensive side. I think there's a certain level of like I really fight for the guys that get, I think, overly hated sometimes. I feel like he's one that is a victim of his got drafted second overall. I kind of feel like maybe mistreated is the wrong word, but I think maybe mishandled by the organization in terms of not always getting the minutes I thought he deserved, certainly not getting treated the way a second overall pick would be treated. I think it's a little bit the unique situation of the Rangers quickly turned it around after the letter and announcing their rebuild, where very quickly after that, you signed Panarin, and all of a sudden, well, now we're back to trying to win again. And that means that Kakko is relegated to a bottom six role. I've always liked what he brings to the table, and when I look at his struggles this year, especially on the offensive side, I tend not to put those on him so much as when he was struggling on the first line, the entire first line was struggling. So when Wheeler was on the first line, it wasn't like that line took a massive leap, or whoever they've moved up to that first line. They haven't found that guy yet. So I think it's unfair to blame Kakko for the offensive struggles. I always have been a big fan of what he does defensively. You mentioned he's a possession monster. Like, I love his style of hockey. To me, it translates perfectly to playoffs when you're going to need that toughness and the ice strength. So I will go to my deathbed defending Capo Kakko.
And
I always, sorry.
Sorry, Jack, what were you say?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I always understood that there was a possibility, especially during the trade deadline, all the different rumors that you heard. I understood that there were some, scenarios in which it would be possible to trade a Capo Kakko, more specifically trying to get Gensel. But the other thing, and I'll kind of second what Lou is saying and what you're saying as well, is that I just see too much value in what not only just the youth that the Rangers have, because that's one thing I think is powerful with the Rangers. You mentioned kind of the age breakdown, the age distribution of the Rangers roster. But just, I think there's still so much more to be shown from Capo Kakko just because of his age alone, just how young he is. But then I also think that the Rangers are kind of indebted to Capo Kakko for the defensive play that he's been able to show as a young forward. And I think I've talked about this at other points in the season where as good of a team as the Rangers are and as good of a year as they've had, basically running the Metro the entire season, it is unbelievable how continually dominant they've been for as poor at 5-on-5 as they've been at different times of the season. And on top of that, just that even coming out of the All-Star break where they have a bit of a gauntlet where it's Dallas and Carolina and not Carolina, Dallas and Colorado, and a couple other, big time teams. And they're pulling off these wins, but they're not really scoring in volume. This is a team that sometimes you can never guess what you're going to get out of them offensively on any given night. So I think when you have a team that, yes, is as good as the Rangers are, but are so unpredictable in what they're going to give you in terms of scoring and offensive production, I just think it would be foolish to give away somebody who is tasked as being a forward and someone who's able to create offense, but is given as much defensively as Capo Kakko is given this season.
Yeah, and Jack, building off of that too, Wennberg comes in and he's not a sexy name by any means, but he does a few things for the locker room. One, Swede, fits in with Mika Zibanejad, Eric Gustafsson. That's important for those guys in the locker room to have some national connections. Two, he fills in the 3C, and he's not a scoring guy like Phil Hedl. Listen, that's an irreplaceable player. The reality is Phil Hedl is never going to be replaced. But what they created is a distinct top six and bottom six. You have Wennberg at 3C, Kakko, who we just talked about, and on the left side, Will Cooley, who surprised everyone with his play this season. and a fourth line that's now turning into kind of a run and gun style. You had Pitlick and Bonino there at points. Rempe comes up, and again, another pleasant surprise. That's what happens with good drafting. I think Drury has done a great job with his staff with drafting. And on top of that, and development in Hartford, by the way, as well. Then you also look to the left side, you have Jimmy Vesey, another player that came in on a PTO. Surprised everyone and has some goal scoring ability. But those players know that they're not going to be relied on to come through in the big moment. But if they do, that's a plus. I think it's very distinct, the line between the first and second line and the third and fourth line. And that'll be crucial going into the postseason. And Kakko has a lot to do with that. There's a little more of an identity with your rotation. It's 4 lines, but you know what their identity and role is going over the boards. There's no question there anymore.
And I think a big critique of last year, and it's I think something that everyone, especially like guys like Elliot Friedman, will bring up every deadline, is the teams that make big moves. Sometimes that could upset the balance of a team because it changes roles. I don't think anyone's role is changing dramatically. Maybe Roslovic, but even he was playing first line minutes in Columbus too, so it's not like his role drastically changes. And I think the Rangers need him to probably take some top 6 minutes. That being said, even if he starts to struggle, I think you could still slide other people up that right wing. What excites me is not only do you have, I think, nice role fits, especially in your bottom 6, you have so many different moving parts in what you can do. Like Brodzinski's getting scratched right now. If this bottom 6 doesn't exactly start to gel, you can slide Brodzinski in either at center or wing. Wennberg can move center to wing. Roslovic can move center to wing as well. They better not take Rempe out of the lineup right now, but you have so many options with who are you going to scratch, even with your D pairs at Jones. And I hear good things about Ruhwedel and his defensive play, that you have so many options, especially in your bottom 6. And Wennberg has a beautiful white stick, so that's really cool. Nothing to do with his gameplay, but looks so cool. That I can't not be excited about all the different options you have and the ways you can move your bottom 6 around to make it the perfect fit.
Like you mentioned, last year, I think something that, now that you're saying that, I never really formulated a thought on it, but this is talking off the top here. There were points where they started to shuffle the lines when they were losing to the Devils. And it was Patrick Kane, Trocheck, and Lafreniere. And now, yeah, it's great. You have these 2 studs, generational guys who have won cups. I think the downside of when they started to shuffle those lines was, Tarasenko fit in well with Kreider and Zibanejad. That seemed like a lock. I felt like because Lafreniere and Panarin weren't playing well, they weren't getting good matchups. Is Patrick Kane's not going to be the F1 going and hunting the puck down in the corner. So now that's kind of on Lafreniere, who was on a checking line earlier in the year with the kid line. But Trocheck's also shown flashes of skill. So is he going to be that guy? Granted, it's all kind of reads and situations, but I think at the end of the day, that exemplified kind of the confusion of what roles were. Is Patrick Kane a secondary goal scorer on this team? Is he a player that you're deploying and just expecting him to go off? I mean, I think that was really the reality, right? And they also knew he wasn't fully healthy. Overall, what I'm stating is that you had a second line that there was kind of no identity. And when they blew up the kid line, there was no real third line that was solid. This season, it seems like there's more confidence in the roles. And I agree with you. I think that was a great take. This is a team that they never shifted anything. Something I pointed out with Vancouver is I feel not only did they pay a lot for Elias Lindholm, but they shifted a player into their lineup that was on a team. You have to make some moves, but I didn't feel that team needed to make a splash like that. So those things do affect the team. I'm interested to see how Vegas responds as well, with not only Stone being out, but acquiring 3 players that are going to play. It's going to be interesting to see what happens down the stretch, because that does affect stuff.
Because it's funny you say that, because I remember talking with some of our hockey guys after the Lindholm trade, because back when there were rumors about the Rangers being in that, and I was scared of the price and kind of scared of the player and how he'd been struggling in Calgary. Part of me kind of went, well, Vancouver's playing so well that if there's any team that can stomach a struggling Lindholm and maybe turn him around, it's them. If he doesn't revert to what he was with Gaudreau and Tkachuk, Well, they already have the top offense, so it's not like they're hurt or they need him to do that. But if he does, all of a sudden that's a huge bonus for them. But I think it's a good lead in into one of the big critiques of what the Rangers deadline is. Other teams had huge deadlines. Like obviously Florida gets Tarasenko, Carolina gets Gensel. And then if you look into the West, I think the West really wins the deadline with what Vegas does with Colorado, Vancouver. I can rattle off 6 or 7 teams. So I'm not going to hold you to one, but like who specifically are you scared of right now? Because it makes sense to focus on the East. If you get past the East somehow, you have to go through one of those teams in the West. So there's a lot of things running through my mind of all these big moves that have been made.
I'll tell you, it's Florida. And I know that's the common consensus, but they're the one contender who has a goaltender that can play like Shesterkin at his peak. They have an unreal top six. They have feistiness to their game. So they not only have the skill, the brawn, and you saw the way Reinhart scored against the Rangers a few weeks back. Maybe it was last week. The give and go with speed, just found the open spot and ripped it home. That's the stuff that is championship caliber. Now, I won't dispute every other team, but you look at the other contenders. Boston has a few game breakers. I don't think as many as the Panthers. And I don't think their goaltending is holding up the same way as Shesterkin can reach his peak. Like Omark's great, but you saw when he was challenged in the postseason, I wouldn't say he struggled, but he gave up 4 goals in a few of the overtime games where they lost the series. They completely collapsed. If you're looking at this year too alone, I think Pasternak's their true game breaker, but that's really it. Brad Marchand, I mean, a potential Hall of Famer, future Hall of Famer. Vancouver, when you get to the West, to me, there's going to be one team that surprises and shocks, right? Right now, we have the contenders listed, but Colorado could beat Vegas, and that's it. There's no more Vegas. The East, I think the East really does run through Florida because I think no matter what, they are likely to go to the conference final. Now, this is also a team that was a wild card team that beat the sure Stanley Cup champion last year in wild fashion. They barely made it into the postseason when the year before they won the President's Trophy and also lost to Tampa in 4. So I think my thought process is that there's going to be upsets and we never really, you just don't know what they're going to be. But for the sake of conversation, Florida is the team that I think has the pieces up and down the lineup that in the East, the Rangers are going to have to face, right? Like if they make the Cup final, you never know, what you're going to get. I think out of the East, it's going to be Florida for sure. That's at least the second round conference final team that you may play.
I also had Florida for the team I thought was to be the most feared going forward. You already had pre-deadline, Florida was already starting to head there, kind of already solidified their spot there. Once they took over the Atlantic, Boston goes on a bit of a skid, and actually a pretty lengthy skid. And you see Florida take over the Atlantic, and it's like, all right, the East is going through Florida. It slowly shifts to that sort of view, and that's before the deadline. That's before they pick up Tarasenko. That's also before they pick up Kyle Opozo from Buffalo. So those are 2 guys. I feel like at the deadline, Florida wasn't even super aggressive at the deadline. They really just went out there and looked for guys who are desperate to get off their teams and go contribute to a winning team. They wanted veteran presence that could just go and help them win. And I think you get that in Tarasenko, you get that in Opozo, 2 guys who are veterans who know how to score. And that's already being added to a team that, like you mentioned, has a disgusting top 6. So I really think right now there are plenty of real contenders in the West. I think the West is going to be a really fun. I think the Western Conference playoffs are going to be really fun because I could see 3 or 4 different teams really throwing a wrench into things. But I think the most complete team right now is the Florida Panthers, and I think they're terrifying.
I'll say this too. This is I think controversial take for how well they're playing. I think Carolina is, I don't have any faith in them. I think they're a team that they added 1 goal scorer, and no stigma here, but Evgeny Kuznetsov just came off of a stint with the Players Assistance Program. We know he had issues with, we know from videos that surfaced online, some drug issues at some point in his career. Like, it sent him on a different path. He struggled for a number of years. He was with the Hershey Bears on his return, and now he's in Carolina. That to me was a player the Rangers were, I don't think they were ever going to be in on. I think that was a very unique situation. Carolina liked the way he played and they took a chance. I don't, at his peak, he's elite. And I think he's a great playmaker. He was unreal in the 2018 playoffs, right? But to me, it's like if he gets hot and the rest of the team is hot, I think he's a cog in the machine, but I don't think he plays the same way that a Sam Bennett, Tarasenko does. And then the Hurricanes add one goal scorer, and I think that's the department they struggle in the most. They rotate 4 lines. They have that approach to they have top to bottom lines that'll outskate you, outwork you. But I don't think they have a significant finisher, even with the addition of Gensel. Kuznetsov's a wild card, and they don't have the goaltending. So I'll say out of the teams that right now are, I guess, the gassed up contenders, I don't buy the Carolina talk at all.
I wonder about them a little bit just because Gensel, we know what he did to the Rangers 2 years ago, even though they won that series. Like, Gensel's a Ranger killer. I think the talk of them has always been they lack that extra goal scorer, and now it feels like they've got it. I still agree. I don't think they have the depth of goal scorers that, like, they can't match up offensively with even like a Toronto. Like, they don't have that sheer amount of goal scoring. The goaltending's not there. But I sometimes wonder in the playoffs, like, look how last year went. Like, a goaltender might step up. I don't know. I don't really have faith in their goaltending. I'd be lying to you if I said I was scared of Carolina, but I'm definitely more intrigued by them now that they've gone out and gotten Gensel. I know that Detroit hasn't been red hot, but they always kind of perk me a little bit. Just like I like what Kane's done with them this year. I think they've got a little edge. Like when it comes to sneaky teams in the East, I keep an eye on Detroit just because I feel like if there's anyone that's going to do a Florida run, it'd be them this year.
I like that take. I'll say this though. I think Detroit is definitely a tier under the top teams we're talking about. A team that I'm interested and intrigued by is Tampa, because I feel they are a team that if they get a crucial save or score a clutch goal down 2-0 in a series or in a wild card right now, say they play the Rangers. I think that in a game 3, if they score, which we've seen them do before, a overtime goal, a late goal, a timely goal, or get a timely save, and Vasilevsky can get hot, I think they're a team that can easily take any of the contenders to 7. They're a big question mark, and I know they lost to Toronto, and it's a different team now, but I think the core pieces know how to win, and I think they're another team to monitor. They've been my pick all year to keep an eye out for if the Rangers are going to play a wild card team in the postseason.
It's been a weird year for Vasi, but if he turns it on, it changes everything.
Right? I mean, you saw with Florida last year, Bobrovsky is a player that he's either up here and the best in the league, or he's down here and he's, below average. And you could see he made that save on Marchand late in the game 5 or game 4 or 5. It completely changed the series. And I think the Lightning have something in the bottle.
Well, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little Rempe with you, because I think we text about him all the time. This was a debate in the press conference before Laviolette came in. Rempe-mania or Rempe-sanity? That was a little going back and forth as to which is better. I'm still undecided.
Yeah, I think both have been used in situations that I enjoyed in the past, right? Linsanity, and then Rempe-mania was the original. 2019. The same night as the Rams and Chiefs all-time scoring game. I'm sitting at the Garden because my brother and I get tickets. It's his winter break or whatever. And it's the peak of Rempe-mania, which at the time was when Philip Hedl was recalled and he was on a scoring tear. And he was kind of breaking the teenage records, milestones for Ranger players. And at that point it was full rebuild. So this team was not good, 2018-19. So I've referred to the Rempe situation as both, like Rempe-mania, Rempe-sanity. But I also feel like there's part of me that has a tough time. Like I would love to see something new. Then
I
again,
love the Rempe-mania. I know it's not like a name, but like the Rempe-mania has stuck with me.
I love that.
Barstool's selling T-shirts now that say Empire State Building, and
What about
it's him hanging like Godzilla from the Empire State Building.
I think this is off the dome. What about Rampage instead of Rampage?
Rampage. That would be a good one. Clip that.
Yeah. Well, toss it out there. See what Laz thinks about it. But no, I'm just struck by. Obviously, I love the physicality bursts onto the scene with the fight with Martin and that whole thing that comes out about that is awesome. But lately, how he's kind of become more of a full player in my eyes. Like I think the first few games when he was only fighting, I started to get worried about like, all right, is this shtick gonna get old? He's forechecking now. Like people are afraid to play the puck in their own zone because he's coming down there with speed. He's done some nice stuff offensively. Almost had his second goal the other day. I did not think we were going to get as complete of an experience with Matt Rempe, and I'm loving every second of it.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. I think the conversations move from the jump on the scene and sensation of, right, like he looks over at the bench to fight Reeves. There's been these cinematic moments and they don't seem real. Like we don't get these very often. So it grabbed the NHL by storm. Now we're looking at a player that is really having an impact. And I think changing the way that fourth line's played. In the beginning of the year, we saw they were really hard forecheckers, hard-working players, and they were able to make turnovers. They weren't really capitalizing on their chances. He makes that line heavier, right? He makes that line a little more feared. And I think that's going to be crucial to play against opponents in the postseason. I think he's really solidifying himself. And as you mentioned, playing a lot more of a complete game. To watch, it's been a spectacle. And it seemed like something where everyone was happy. It was like, we don't know where this is going to go, but it's exciting. And now we're seeing a player that still has that in his bag of tricks. But, he mentioned today at the pre-skate that he mentioned they're playing the Devils. I'm sure by the time this is out, this is old news, but he mentioned that, like, the hit, he wasn't disciplined for it against the Devils. He's going to bring that game. And I think that's also part of kind of the swagger that the team also is kind of needed. And we saw that when Reeves was a Ranger. They played a little bit heavier when Reeves was in the lineup, and he changed the culture in that respect. I think the team missed that last year in the locker room. I think they missed that energy on the ice. And now you have some big guys. When they have Rempe out there with Trouba and Miller, you got trees and not bushes. And I think that's crucial in the postseason.
I mean, if you ask Mark Madden, he's nothing more than just this goon chump that the losers in the cheap seats of MSG, which I didn't know existed because I still haven't. I don't think I haven't been able to afford to go to a game, not as a reporter at MSG. But no, I mean, I think someone like him. First of all, I understand the question marks around his play style when the first things that are publicized about him are the fights, right? When he comes onto the scene, his first shift, he fights Matt Martin. It starts off with a bang, and then even in the few games after, the highlights were physicality, the highlights were fights, big hits. It wasn't goals, it wasn't finesse plays, it wasn't any of those kinds of things. So I understand the question marks around it, but I just feel like with each game, you're seeing him grow just a little bit and a little bit and a little bit more. I think he's at 9 games. He's got like a goal and assist. He's +2. Like he's out there doing what he's supposed to be doing. Yes, it's in short amounts of minutes, which for some reason, some people have been using as a critique of him. It's like, oh, how can you be an impact player when you're only on there 5 minutes at a time? And I understand that, like, I understand that in the long run, yes, you're not going to see perhaps somebody who changes the course of the game if they're out there for that small of a time period per game. But if he's out there for the shorter minutes that he's doing and he's doing his job, one, I don't see what the downside has been to him so far. And again, in a sport like hockey where the physicality and the violence is constant, I also think hockey is a unique sport in that there are people who change the culture of a team and change the momentum of a team and do nothing in the scorebook, because sometimes all it takes is somebody who's willing to put it all out there physically to fire their boys up. So I think and the other thing I've been impressed by just getting to see him play in person is, for as mammoth of a human as he is, he moves pretty well. Like, he moves fast. He seems athletic. As Lou mentioned, he's starting to forecheck. Guys are being, scared to hold on to the puck because they see him coming at him too fast. I've been very high on Matt Rempe. I think it's been great for New York. I think it's been great for the league. I'm confident to see what he still has in the tank as we head into kind of crunch time in the season, which I also think a physical presence like Matt Rempe is very valuable, because anyone who's watched a lot of hockey knows that once you get into the later portion of the season, if you think it's physical and intense now, just wait until we're a few weeks left in the season, when either teams are fighting for their lives, or once we get into the playoffs and it's full-blown playoff hockey. Am I saying that right now I think he's going to be on the playoff roster? Is he a lock for the playoff roster? We'll see. I'm not making any of those takes right now. But as you get into the real run of the season, the home stretch of the season, when intensity and physicality and everything that Rempe provides amps up, I don't see any negatives to this kid so far. I really don't.
Most teams are playing for something, right? And that's what you just mentioned. In the push for the playoff, a lot of teams are fighting for something still. And as you know, the reality is it's going to be more physical. I think the universal experience that everyone knows, and it sounds so basic and fundamental, it's the truth of the fact that anyone who's played in a physical sport knows what it's like to line up across from someone that's a lot bigger than you. Whether that's in football, even soccer, basketball, there's mismatches. It's so strange to see it at the world-class professional level. But the fact that players like Justin Falk, I know, Lou, that's kind of what you're referring to, is that situation where he didn't know what to do. We've all been frozen by looking at someone larger than us coming at us, and we have to make a quick decision. And that's a universal experience in the sports world. I think it's funny because people, it seems, want analytics, and the reality is that's the game. If you can force a player to just make a mistake, or throw an indirect pass off the boards because they can't, they're either going to absorb the hit or focus on absorbing the hit, or their vision, they only have a quick read to look and break a puck out. The fact you have that in your arsenal, and the fact he has a more well-rounded game than most gave him credit for, I think, Jack, it's going to solidify him a role for the postseason. I'm going to go and I'm going to say, even though it's a few games out from now, if he this week continues to play he has with 5 games on deck, I think he's a lock. I don't think you move him. Listen, we've also seen the team bring up Hoffman and send him down. So it might be a different approach than they have had in the past with young guys, but I think there's almost no reason to remove him from the lineup right now.
I think people would tear down the building if Laviolette scratched him in the next week. I mean, I'm legitimately trying to think and almost trying to do across New York sports. It's been I think first time in my lifetime where a player gets shown in the scoreboard pregame and he gets standing ovations. And it's almost like college, where it's they're chanting for him to get into the game. Laviolette throws him on the power play at the end of the game, and it was like when a college crowd chants for their favorite bench player to get in. I've never seen this at the professional level before.
Yeah, it's something that I'm sure if you go back in the history of the game, 100 NHL years, maybe there's probably been a few players, but it harkens back for Ranger fans to a Nick Fotiu. My uncle gave me one of the pucks that he would throw into the stands. He would skate out, point to the blue seats, and throw 8 pucks a night. And he was the same way, a New York bred guy, kind of like an Adam Fox, and a guy that played a physical game. And he really only got his best chance in New York at the NHL level. It's reminiscent of that, different situation, different time in terms of context. But I agree, Lou. That's a great comparison. It's kind of like he's this third string player that is in the limelight right now. And granted, this is it's the most famous arena in the world. So the fact he's doing it there too is just unreal. I mean, it has the league by storm. And I think now that things I'd say outside of the Rangers sphere have calmed down a little bit following those fights. As you mentioned, Jack, the fact he's impactful with limited time on ice is going to be crucial moving forward. You look at most teams that have won the Cup in the last few years, they have players like that on their roster. Pat Maroon is namely one of them from the 2019 Blues team.
Matt Mugno, host of Puck Talk CS. Anything else you want to plug before we're all done with you?
No, you guys are great. I think the one thing I'll plug is how great the radio station you guys got going on is over there. So for all the listeners, be sure to keep along. These guys are in the building. I'm not in the building. These guys are in the building talking to the players, doing a phenomenal job. Their coverage, honestly, between post-game videos, everything, follow these guys on Twitter because that's what I'm doing. That's where I'm getting a lot of my scoop from too. So Jack and Lou, you guys are great. We'll keep in touch.
Well, we appreciate you. And hey, don't sell yourself short. I know you've been calling some play-by-play for Army lacrosse, so I know that's not hockey, but
Go
how
Army.
special is this?
Go Army.
Go Army. Yeah, it's funny. I don't know the penalties really well. And this is the number one. They were ranked the number one team in the nation for the first time ever.
Oh, that's awesome.
After last week. So it's awesome. But it's a similar situation to where I was with Quinnipiac hockey. I didn't know college hockey at all. I went to a few games. My brother went out to Penn State. And that's where I kind of got into it. But I didn't know the conferences, this, that. Like, I didn't know college sports growing up, really. So when I got into it and then COVID year and whatever, I had to catch up on a lot. And luckily, Quinnipiac had a year where they lost before they won. So I got to learn the whole thing before. But it's the same thing where I come in and like I had my first few calls and they're the first time. They've been around since 1910. Woodrow Wilson played men's lacrosse for Army. And I'm there like broadcasting, and this week they're number one. So now like, I'm hitting the books hard, boys.
Well, Matt Mugno at MugnoMA on Twitter. Follow the kid. He's great. Dude, thank you so much for taking this time.
Thank you, man.
Of course, you guys are the best.
I mean, how awesome is Matt Mugno? I mean,
I'm a fan.
That was such a full circle moment too, because as I mentioned, kind of touched on in the interview, that was one of the first people I met because I was an Islanders guy last year, as you know, and as other people in the station know. So, I was so excited once getting appointed to the Rangers job. I was so much so that I went and covered a couple preseason games just to kind of get a feel for the roster and some of the things that were going on. There was a conversation between Cooley and Ottman in the beginning of the during the preseason, and there were some things being sorted out. So, I got to go to the Garden and see a couple of preseason games and just kind of get a feel. And I just remember the very first game I did, it was against the Devils. And, I met this kid who was just sitting next to me. And I felt comfortable to talk to him just because he looked young. Like, a lot of the people that we're up there working with, it's all business. But, we're up there with some people who we read their work to inform ours. And sometimes starstruck might not be the right word, but you might not strike conversation with everyone like they're your boy because it's like they got a job to do. They're doing their thing. But Matthew was just so nice and considerate, and I got to tell him a little bit about myself. He told me about himself. He went to Quinnipiac for his undergrad. Got to broadcast some national championship hockey.
It's pretty cool.
In his senior year.
It's pretty sick stuff,
so
man.
Me being from Connecticut, we were able to strike a connection pretty quick. And, like I said on the interview, I came home from work that night and I told you, I said, hey, Lou, when you get back there, make sure to introduce yourself. I met him tonight. Seems like a great dude. And aren't we happy that we took things further with him because he's just such a great dude.
I think it's a unique experience to get to run into someone in the press box that is not only close to your age, but I think has somewhat of a young career path that you try and model yourself after in a certain
100%.
sense. It's not identical, but it's a guy that called hockey at Quinnipiac and now has moved right into beat reporting and hosting a podcast. And to have someone that a year removed from being in college, it's kind of cool to get to sit next to someone on the bridge and yuck it up with them, which is what we got to do for over half the season. So.
And just a guy that loves what he does. I mean, he loves hockey. He loves everything about it. I remember him even telling me when we met on the bridge and I was getting to learn a little more about him that like he's substitute teaching half the time. He was doing that kind of stuff during the day and then covering some games at night. So like, dude's a grinder too. That's the other thing. He loves hockey and he leaves it all out there for the stuff that he does.
And he keeps in touch,
which is
warms
so
the
cool.
heart. DMing on Twitter all the time.
Yeah.
So that's actually how we set that interview up. A lot of times after interviews, I think we come back here in the studio and we try and break down loose ends or anything like that. I don't feel like there were a lot of loose ends. We talked with him for a while, and I think we covered a lot of wide-ranging things. But I do think the one thing that we need to get into, full disclosure, we did that interview with Matt on Monday early in the afternoon. The Devils game hadn't happened yet, and so you hear Matt talk about the Devils game a little bit.
Yep.
So then we have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is we spoke.
Who's the size of an elephant?
We spoke very highly about Matt Rempe in that interview and how complete his game had been looking. But I think the one thing that we kind of left unsaid that reared its ugly head again is the way he plays out of control sometimes and his inability to rein himself in. And, we meet now the day after Rempe goes flying at Siegenthaler, elbow flying out, nails him in the head. I think Siegenthaler was probably lucky that he didn't get knocked out, and Rempe taunting the Devils bench as he skates away. I won't lie, I thought that was funny.
I thought it was awesome.
But you look at the hit, it's a really tough hit. It's one that he received a game misconduct for. It's 2 games against the Devils. He's received a game misconduct in both of them. And now you're looking at likely a suspension. As we record this right now, this is a Tuesday afternoon. No official verdict on the suspension yet, but we do know that it's a phone hearing, meaning that it can be no more than a 5-game suspension. But I think you're undoubtedly looking at games that's probably one of the dirtier hits we've seen this season, whether it was intentionally that way or not.
Well, that's the thing, is the first time against the Devils was, I think, where...
Just got the tweet from Johnny Lazarus, 4 games for Matt Rempe. So how
look at that.
Excellent timing.
Okay, so that's actually fantastic. News breaking while we're recording. 4-game suspension for Matt Rempe for his hit on Jonas Siegenthaler, leading with the elbow. Back to, hopping back into things. I think the tough part about this scenario was you look back at the Devils, because, Rempe starts off with a bang, fights Matt Martin in his first game. This guy's a physical presence. He's a goon. He's someone who likes to fight. He's someone who likes to get physical. That's part of his game. He fires up his bench. He fires up himself. That's what he does. I even thought that there was a defense of Rempe to be made on the hit on Bastian, because and even that one was, I think, where the Rempe dirty, allegations began, because that was a tough hit. It took Bastian out of the game for I think the rest of that first period.
Made direct contact with the head.
Right, and it was only minutes into the game. I think it may have been Rempe's first shift.
It was definitely his first shift. It might have been the opening 2 minutes.
Right, and even with some of the things that were said about Rempe, not all the nicest things after a hit like that one. I mean, Hudson River rivalry too, for it to be in a game like that, you already knew it was going to, cause a reaction. But I still thought that hit was defensible, because sometimes... I didn't see a distinct movement and aim for the head or anything. You could knock him on the lack of changing his direction, perhaps if he had chosen to duck, but at the same time, it's tough when you're 6'9" on skates and you just happen to be going full speed and your shoulder is at someone else's head level. With that being said, this one was a lot tougher. This one was harder to defend. And I think the main thing that it comes back to is, again, like you said, that sometimes he can be a little bit wild. I think you can tell that he's only been in the league for just short of a dozen games. So I think, you could chalk the Bastian hit up to a mistake. You could chalk that up to it, just being the game moving too fast and not being able to react quick enough. This hit on Siegenthaler, he led with an elbow. Whether or not he meant to really rough up Siegenthaler, I don't know. But this one is hard to defend, because if malintention isn't the reason he did it, then or if malintention isn't the proper diagnosis of why he did that or how that happened, then a lack of discipline is.
Either way, you get to a certain point where the intention doesn't matter. It's worse if he's actively leading with the elbow and trying to hit Siegenthaler on the head, and you like to think that that's not what was happening, because by all accounts, Rempe, certainly off the ice, has been a great guy and a really nice individual. I think this is the first instance where we're legitimately, outside of the Bastian hit, where you're legitimately starting to see things about, is he a dirty player or not? Either way, whether it's malintent or whether it's out of control, it's something that needs to be fixed. Because I thought something that was interesting, the Adam Herman tweets from a couple weeks ago about Matt Rempe when he was in the WHL, 11 fights in 165 games. And the tweet basically went on to say that, this is not Rempe's game, but he knows that this is what he needs to do to make an NHL wage and to stay on an NHL roster. And you understand where that's coming from. The Rangers felt like they needed a big presence, a guy that could hit, a guy that could fight. But you see it in some of the fights. He's not the perfect fighter. He still leaves himself defenseless and stuff like that. And I think you're seeing it with some of the hits. The Bastian one, he does a good job of tucking his elbow, but he doesn't account for the fact that he's 6'9", and so he makes contact with the head. And this one, he lets his elbow fly out, and he makes contact with the head. And so these are two serious potential head injury plays that could devastatingly ruin someone's career. And so you're messing with people's lives and their livelihoods here. It's not a joking matter. And so I think the conversation that you run into, people might be surprised that it's a 4-game suspension. To me, given the fact that it's already his second game misconduct and the severity of the hit, maybe it's on the stronger side, but I'm not too surprised with it.
We've also talked about, in passing, I think more on our 5-on-3 podcast, plugging that for WFUV, about how there's only, like, the fighting is fun. Everyone has had fun watching what Rempe brings. It's obvious that he's been a spectacle. Everyone knows who he is now. But at the same time, there's only a certain extent that this can go to before he starts putting himself in danger, before he starts putting his health in danger, and he's already, with hits like this, he's already putting the health of others in danger. I do agree with you. I don't think this is the type of Matt Rempe that, like, he really is. I think this was just a bad hit, an undisciplined hit. But at the same time, this guy can't put too many targets on his back. I understand that he's still young. He's still proving things. We talked with Mugno in the interview about how, it's not a lock yet if this is a guy that ends up on a playoff roster. Matt believed that he is. I would be open to the idea of him being that kind of guy that can step up into that role. But still, you got to be thinking long term with a kid like this, where, like, it's going to come to a point where you've already seen a laundry list of players who have already met him during warmups to want to fight him and be like, hey, you want to get him off. That's just in good fun. That's just guys that appreciate his physicality and want to fight him. When you already have people like that he, in this first couple weeks in the league he spent, is the first guy that is always picked on by someone on the other team to, hey, you want to get him off right now. That's just when it's in good fun and they just want to throw hands. When it's actual, like, dirty hits and real, like, anger between the teams, you really don't want this to become a guy who always has a target on his back, because even when he was doing things completely rule-abiding, guys wanted a piece of him.
And the conversation that you stumble into, because it's we talked a lot about it when we were talking with Mugno about now the increased depth and the increased ability to switch guys in and out with the bottom six, is that Matt Rempe's not a lock to be on this team playoff roster-wise. And that you have Johnny Brodzinski, a guy that was scratched the last 2 games that I thought was doing a pretty serviceable job as the 3C, and even if he's not the 3C, you could put him as a wing on the 4th line or the 3rd line. Or you could call up a guy like Adam Edstrom that maybe doesn't bring the same physicality that Rempe brings, but similar size. I still personally think that Edstrom is a better skater.
And brings a good amount of the physicality, too. It's not quite Rempe's, but he brings enough of his own.
He can definitely hit, and I think he's smoother with the puck. I think he's a better defender than Rempe is. That, they might not get from a singular player what they get from Rempe, and I'm not sure there's another player on the roster that can quite recreate the impact that Rempe has. But they can get value from their bottom 6 and other places, and I kind of start to wonder, is this a guy that Peter Laviolette's going to be able to trust in the playoffs or down the stretch of this season? I have to think that this suspension probably hurts that a little bit.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is this team is on a cup run. This isn't a New York Islanders or a Detroit Red Wings that's scrapping just for a chance to get up there. This team is on a cup run, and it's been defined for most of the season now. When you start to get into these late games down the stretch, people really, I don't think, saw much of the penalty for, other than the game misconduct the first time in Jersey, because, again, he was ejected both times. But any other time that you've seen a physical Matt Rempe highlight, it's usually been 2 guys fighting. They both get sent to the box. You don't see any repercussions for it. Last night, they were lucky they were playing the Devils. You talked about it as soon as you got home from the game, that the Devils were lifeless during that 5-minute power play.
And it's kind of wild. They only had 2 shots on goal. I would have thought that hit, a lot of times a hit like that wakes up the other team, and then you're in for a load of trouble.
So you're telling me you would feel good about this team giving 5 minutes to a Florida Panthers because, Matt Rempe couldn't put a clean hit on somebody? You're telling me these undisciplined plays? No one wants to see that kind of stuff happen.
Right. It's interesting you go there with sometimes the fights work the other way in terms of motivating teams. Like, we all loved the fight between him and Matt Martin, who was his first shift. But that fight coincided with 3 straight goals for the Islanders. So It's not always that when Rempe takes on a fight or he accepts a challenge, that's going to be a boost for the Rangers. Sometimes it's a boost for the other team, especially if Rempe's a guy that has a target on his back, or if he's a guy that other teams go into the game and go, we want to fight this guy. Just the fact that they challenge him is a boost for the other team, and you run into that whole mental hula hoop of how are we going to deal with this, and is that something that you want to risk in a playoff series?
Even when he fought Reeves, like New York scored late and tied the game. Yes, Toronto won the game. Like it's not always, it's not always just because Rempe throws himself in there and gets into a fight that it lights a fire under New York's rear end and they go out and win the game. Like it's not always like that. It's an adrenaline rush for both sides. It's a boost for both sides. Everyone's tapping sticks after a fight. It's not just one side. It's not just the side that wins the fight.
So Rempe will miss the next 4 games. That includes, as we record this, it won't. By the time we post this, the game will already have happened. But that includes, as of recording tonight, at Carolina. And this stretch, it's starting with the Jersey game, a gauntlet of 5 games in 7 days, 7 and 9 games. That you do kind of wonder how the lineup's going to shake out. On a lighter note, you're going to spend a pretty special Sunday this week, Jack.
This Sunday, St. Patrick's Day, Madison Square Garden, Islanders at Rangers. I will be spending my birthday covering the New York Rangers. Hopefully I get a good game. But honestly, based on how the Islanders have been playing, they're on a 6-game heater. It got snapped by
lost to the Kings.
Yeah, it's true. So it could have been a 7-game heater, but it was a 6-game heater up until they met the Kings.
They're right in the playoff mix now.
Either way, the Islanders are in the mix. And just off the Stadium Series, before they got on this heater, just seeing that game, I got excited for this one. So MSG, split New York crowd on my birthday, St. Patty's Day. I know it's always a celebratory day. Not only it's fun having a birthday on St. Patrick's Day. Everyone's celebrating.
I mean, you say the phrases Rangers Isles, St. Patrick's Day, MSG. That's already electric. You throw in the phrases Jack Warner and birthday, and I don't know how I'm going to be able to handle myself on Sunday. I'm not even going to be at the game, and I'm going to be jumping up and down.
I gotta plan in advance and pick a good use of my media meal voucher at MSG. Get a good birthday meal out of it. We'll see.
Have you tried the Milano yet? It's a really good.
I haven't. I actually haven't done it yet, but we need to make a mutual trade here. I need to try the Milano. You need to get the go to the taco stand, get the carne asada.
That requires me getting to MSG before 6:00, which has not happened lately.
That's true. That's fair.
I gotta get on my horse and start getting there a little earlier. But I think that wraps up our third Rangers roundup. It's as promised. We were able to get you this one post deadline, and to tell you the truth, I'm not sure when the next one will come. Maybe we wait until the start of the playoffs, or maybe something big happens down the stretch with the playoff race. But you got the Canes 4 points behind the Rangers. Rangers have the lead in the Metro, but things are definitely tight. You got a gauntlet coming up, so a lot of fun stuff. Looking forward to the Islanders game on Sunday, but
as am I.
It will do it for our third Rangers roundup. For Jack Warner, Lou Orlando, your New York Rangers beat reporters, always happy to bring you this production of WFV Sports.